You're not actually going into the Star Wars fandom!
They'd go crazy and follow us, wouldn't they?
You don't have to do this to impress our fans. Miss, the possibility of successfully talking about Star Wars online without sparking violent internet arguments in the comments section is approximately 3,720 to 1!
Never tell me the odds. You probably know this already, but I am a huge Star Wars fan. Like, to the point where I've never seen an officially made Star Wars movie or TV show and disliked it. I liked the sequel trilogy, I enjoyed the Book of Boba Fett and the Acolyte, I loved the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, and I even found the holiday special good for ironic laughs. The original 6 films will always be my favorites, though. But I didn't actually get into Star Wars because my parents sat me down and showed me the movies, oh no. I got into Star Wars because I found and started playing my little brother's copy of LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga. No, not that one. This one. When people talk about LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga online, they're usually referring to the versions on 7th generation home consoles. These games were iconic, high quality, faithful to their source material, and were an important part of many Gen Z childhoods, including my own. But LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga wasn't a trio. It was a Fab Four, and the DS version was very much the Ringo of the group. Heck, the only reason my brother and I convinced our parents to buy us the Wii version when we were kids is because we'd heard that it had a lot of things that the DS version didn't. And because it's so stripped down, I rarely hear anyone talk about it. So if nobody else is gonna do it, I guess I'll have to do it myself. Now keep in mind, this game was my childhood, I played it over and over again growing up and loved exploring the world of Star Wars, and I still have my old copy of the game from back then, which is now at 97.2 completion. However, with the benefit of hindsight and the console version and now the PC version to compare it to, I understand that it's very flawed. So this is not coming from a place of blind hatred, this is coming from a place of going back to one of my personal childhood classics and seeing all the cracks that my 8-year-old mind papered over. Like looking at a photo of yourself when you were younger and thinking, oh my gosh, did I really think that outfit was flattering? LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga is still one of my favorite games of all time, it's just that the console versions offer a far superior experience, and I'm going to explain why in this video. Also, I do not have any kind of capture card, so I have recorded the footage of this game using a Desmume Nintendo DS emulator. So if you see a Koichi Komeiji cursor on the screen, you now know why. So without further ado, let's talk about the Nintendo DS LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga game. Into the garbage chute, flyboys! LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga is far from the first game to have a SAD handheld port. SAD handheld ports have been around for decades. Up until sometime in the early 2010s, it was generally thought that if a game for consoles was ported to a handheld system, it would become way worse in the process. And I've got decades worth of examples to back me up. Now, for those above a certain age or who watch a certain easily enraged game reviewer, when I mentioned SAD handheld ports, one name jumped to the front of your mind: Tiger Electronics. Back in the 1990s, Tiger was the Shein of the gaming industry. Cheap and readily available, but objectively way worse than its pricier competition. They used calculator technology to make primitive game consoles with built-in games. And in addition to making games based on popular films and TV shows of the time, they also made ports of pre-existing video games that were on arcade machines or home consoles. Sonic, Castlevania, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Double Dragon, Altered Beast. Not even my favorite video game of all time was spared.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Even when they made their own video game consoles with individual games you could put in the system, the R-Zone and Gamecom, the vast majority of both consoles' libraries consisted of SAD handheld ports of pre-existing games. And the legit handheld systems got their fair share of bad ports too. Now, while we tend to think of the Game Boy as a magical little system where new franchises were born and old franchises got experimental, that's mostly just survivorship bias based on the games that sold the best or gained cult followings online. In truth, most of the Game Boy's library was miserable ports of console and arcade games, which existed for the same reason that travel toothbrushes do, in that the only possible reason you would use it instead of the regular option is if you were going on vacation. And you might say, oh, the only reason those Game Boy ports were terrible is because the Game Boy had no colors or backlighting. Surely more advanced consoles would have better ports. But the thing is, as handheld consoles got more advanced, so too did the games they had to adapt. The Game Gear had bad ports, the Lynx had bad ports, the GBA had bad ports, the PSP had bad ports, the DS had bad ports. Simply put, if you can name a handheld system, it had at least one port of a console game that was significantly worse than its counterpart. Somewhere around the late 90s, many handheld video game creators realized their own limitations and decided to release ports of older games, things that had specs that their system could handle well. Oftentimes, this worked well. However, even this method wasn't safe from porting sickness, with screen crunch, worse audio quality, and wonky controls due to differences in button layout being common issues. One such example of just because this system can technologically handle that game doesn't mean it's going to translate well, that's within my wheelhouse, is Mega Man & Bass. The original Japanese version of the game, Rockman & Forte, was released for the Super Famicom in 1998, when that console was too old to be trendy but too young to be nostalgic. So, in order to give the game a wider audience, it was ported to the Game Boy Advance in 2002, and this port ended up being released internationally. However, porting sickness and its side effects ended up turning what was already one of the more challenging entries in its franchise into a game so soul-crushingly difficult it could be used by the CIA as a method of torture. But Mega Man & Bass is peanuts compared to Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis, a Game Boy Advance port of the original Sonic released during the franchise's biggest flop year, 2006. You'd think that because the original Sonic the Hedgehog's biggest competitor, Super Mario World, translated so well to the GBA, it too would be easy to port to that system. But for some reason, they completely botched it. The screen crunch and wonky camera made it so players would never see anything coming, there were glitches everywhere, and the frame rate was extremely choppy and prone to frequent slowdown. In a Sonic game! A Sonic game that isn't fast is like a cookie that isn't sweet. Whoever made it either had no idea how to make one or completely messed up the recipe. I will give this game one thing though. It proved after all these years that Genesis really does what Nintendo don't. The reason why so many bad handheld ports exist should be fairly obvious. It's a space issue. A handheld console is, by definition, small enough to be held in a child's hands. Thus, it can only have so much hardware space, further compounded by the fact that, unlike most home consoles, it has to have its own display screen. As a result, a console game's chances of getting onto a handheld system is like the ugly stepsister's chances of fitting into Cinderella's shoe. It's not gonna happen unless someone makes some big and very painful cuts.
And even in the DS era, games were not exempt from being severely chiseled down for handhelds, especially with a game as massive as LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga. So let's see what got the Order 66 treatment. In the transition from silver screen to TV screen to dual screen, a lot of stuff is going to be left on the cutting room floor. Of course, LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga is going to have to trim some fat from the movies it's adapting. You can't really make an engaging level out of, say, Luke visiting Yoda on his deathbed or Anakin and Padme awkwardly flirting on Naboo. So for the most part, we got a faithful, if condensed, adaptation of the original 6 films that was still rife with content to keep you playing for hours. But then they had to trim it down further for the handheld port. and many in-game features from the console version suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced.
First of all, you know how LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga has ship levels, and you can unlock different ships and play through ship levels with them in free play? Well, not in this game. All ship levels are locked in story mode, which, considering the ship levels in LEGO Star Wars are very hit or miss, makes them even less fun to revisit for collectibles. Speaking of levels, they trimmed down the amount of levels in each episode from 6 to 5, which meant that some of the levels had to be cut. For the original trilogy, they just merged some of the levels together, so you'd expect they'd do the same thing to the prequel trilogy. But nope! Invasion of Naboo, Bounty Hunter Pursuit, and Chancellor in Peril all got completely cut. Which means that Jar Jar Binks is unlocked with no explanation as to how he joined the heroes in the first place, the battle with Count Dooku aboard the Invisible Hand is relegated to a cutscene, and the Attack of the Clones portion of the game leaves out, like, the entire first half of the movie. And these omissions boggle my mind because Gunship Cavalry, which is the worst level of the entire game, and Ruin of the Jedi, which was based on a deleted scene, were both left in. If you wanted to cut levels from episodes 2 and 3, go for those instead of the ones you did cut. And the levels that survived feel a lot emptier. There are no double score zones, no power-up orbs, no animals that you can ride, not even any purple studs. There's no movie theater in Mos Eisley Spaceport, no boss fight against the Rancor in Jabba's palace, no human Jedi NPCs in Jedi Battle. Even the hub world feels emptier in this game. In the console versions, the level select area for each episode was themed around the episode, designed to resemble a plot-relevant location in the episode and containing little bonuses like an R2-D2 mural or a hat machine. They also had a door at the end of each area where you could test your skills with Super Story, Character Bonus, and Mini-Kit Bonus. But in this game, these areas aren't themed and just have the levels and nothing else. Which leads me to my next point. The game's bonus content ended up getting severely trimmed down. As I mentioned, there's no Super Story, Character Bonus, or Mini-Kit Bonus, but there's also no Bounty Hunter missions, no 2-player duel mode, no challenge mode versions of each level, no gold brick room with 6 extra levels, not even a LEGO Indiana Jones trailer that will unlock Indiana Jones when you watch it. So there's not really much that you can do once you beat all the levels aside from replaying the levels to find every single mini-kit and red power brick, getting enough studs to unlock all the characters and extras, and getting True Jedi. The only bonus feature they didn't cut is the custom character creation, but you can't even name them like you could on consoles. And the characters and extras you could unlock were very pared down. There's no Indiana Jones because there's no Indiana Jones trailer you can watch, but they also left out Zam Wesell, Watto, Captain Tarples, Boss Nass, Pit Droid, Dexter Jetster, Taun We, Lama Su, R2-Q5, and even Isla Secura and Plo Koon. Worse still, they left out an entire class of character, the High Jumper, so every High Jumper character was either removed or had their class changed. Thus, Grievous and his bodyguards basically just act like Sith without the Force, and Jar Jar has a blaster even though I don't think he's ever used one in the movies. Misa packing heat! The extras were slaughtered even further. Of the 45 extras in the console version, only 13 made it onto the DS version. And worse still, none of the fun ones made it in. There's no Super Gonk, no Disguise, no Disarmed Troopers, and worst of all, no extra toggle. So you can't even play as a Womp Rat or a Skeleton or a Jedi Training Remote. Furthermore, a lot of the really useful extras also got the boot, like Perfect Deflect, Stud Magnet, Force Grapple Leap, and my personal favorite extras from the console versions, Mini-Kit Detector and Red Power Brick Detector. which stings because they also removed that little ringing sound that plays when a mini-kit is nearby. So if there's one last mini-kit that you just can't find, well, tough luck. You gotta look it up on the internet and try everything until you find the one you don't have. Finally, the music was severely trimmed down. Like the console version, it only uses music from the original 6 films, albeit looped, and has separate tracks and character levels depending on if there are enemies immediately nearby or not. However, while the console version was very good about using unique music for each level that came from one of the scenes the level was based on, or at least from somewhere in that episode, the handheld version doesn't have such a restriction. So a lot of the themes are recycled or just used in incorrect places. Boarding the Federation battleship, War Plans, Imperial Attack, and the Clash of Lightsabers are each used twice. Finale, Fighting the Destroyer Droids, Zam the Assassin, and The Last Battle are each used 3 times. And Hyperspace is used 5 times. And even for the ones they kept in their original place, the loops are a lot shorter, so you don't get to hear as much of that beautiful John Williams score.
But so what if we lost most of the extras, unlockable ships, and a few glup-shadows? That's porting, baby! And as long as it plays the same as the console versions, it'll be fine. Let's just hope those nerf herders didn't drastically change too much. Well, about that. The console and handheld versions of LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga were both made by the same developer, Traveler's Tales, but they are not the same game. While the Wii, Xbox 360, and PS3 versions are all made using the same engine and are nearly identical, the only difference is that the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions have slightly better graphics and online play, and the Wii version has motion controls, particularly for lightsaber combat. The DS version was built from the ground up as a simulacrum of the console versions that could still fit on the DS's 32-bit hardware. So naturally, there are quite a few differences between them.
The biggest change they made to the game is a side effect of the system it's on. Like a lot of the Nintendo DS's games and marketing at the time, it put a lot of emphasis on the fact that the DS had a touchscreen. So a lot of things in this game are controlled using the touchscreen. Touch the screen to use the Force. Touch the screen to detach the tow cable. Touch the screen to switch characters. Fortunately, they include button options for many of these, but it's still a big part of the game. Speaking of big parts of the game, one of the most memorable and memetic things about LEGO Star Wars is the sounds the characters make when they get hurt or die.
These little voice clips are so iconic, I even temporarily replaced my sensor with the sound Princess Leia makes when she gets hurt for this video. As you can probably tell when I said the phrase glup-shadow.
In the console version, many characters have unique death sounds, but many of these unique death sounds were changed to the default options for the handheld version. Padme had her death sound changed to Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Darth Maul, and Palpatine had their death sounds changed to Jar Jar, Child Anakin, Adult Anakin, Child Boba Fett, Adult Boba Fett, Jango Fett, Lando, Grievous, Geonosian, Admiral Akbar, Imperial Guard, Greedo, Bossk, Dengar, and Forlom had their death sounds changed to and Imperial Spy, Bespin Guard, Gamorrean Guard, Bib Fortuna, and IG-88 all had their death sounds completely removed and weren't replaced by anything. But hey, at least Yoda kept his iconic death sound! Another thing they changed is how the custom characters work. Like in the console versions, they can be made using features from characters you've unlocked so far. However, unlike in the console versions, where the custom characters can just do whatever, in this version, the custom characters are divided into classes: Jedi/Sith, Blaster, Bounty Hunter, or Short. I actually prefer it this way because it makes the custom characters less broken. But you still can't name them in this game, and they left out the bonus NPC-exclusive character design elements, so it's still a downgrade. However, the largest amount of changes happened to the levels. First and foremost, 3 original trilogy levels were merged with a subsequent level due to the reduction of the amount of levels per episode from 6 to 5. Rescue the Princess was grafted onto the beginning of Death Star Escape, The Great Pit of Carkoon was grafted onto the end of Jabba's Palace, and Betrayal over Bespin was spread all over Cloud City Trap, with the story mode switching between both levels' characters and locations frequently during the game. This means that these 3 levels end up feeling very long, even if each level was trimmed down. With Jabba's Palace, I am not complaining at all, as the Jabba's Palace sequence is my favorite part of my favorite movie of all time, and with Cloud City Trap, the switching back and forth element of the level makes it unique enough that its length wasn't really an issue for me, but with Death Star Escape, you definitely feel its length. It really drags on. Furthermore, some of the levels were altered, either due to hardware limitations or just to make them easier. One example is Dagobah. In the console version, the enemies in the Dagobah level are bogwings and the occasional Dagobah python. Understandable, as Dagobah is covered in untamed wilderness and is very sparsely populated. But the engine they used for the DS game likely had trouble animating anything that moved around but was smaller than an Ewok, judging by the removal of extra toggle and toe bombs, so the bogwings were cut, and the pythons were also cut due to animation difficulties or them playing too minor of a role to be transferred over. As such, the DS version of Dagobah has no enemies aside from the Phantom Vader boss fight at the end, and the challenge primarily comes from the puzzles and platforming. I actually prefer this version of Dagobah to the console version. It's really easy to farm for studs here. Another level that was changed significantly is Through the Junland Wastes. Not only was the name of the level shortened to just the Junland Wastes, and the level itself was condensed with much of the small details removed or scaled down, but the Jawa Sandcrawler section is a lot easier. In the console version, the Jawas will actively attack the player if they're playing as a droid, using their zappers to shut them off. In the DS version, however, the Jawas largely leave you alone. Much like Dagobah, the DS version of the Sandcrawler section focuses more on doing puzzles than fighting enemies. And honestly, I like that this version doesn't railroad you into killing the Jawas. I remember playing the Wii version of Through the Junland Wastes with my brother and arguing with him about whether or not we should just shoot the Jawas. And on the topic of levels set on Tatooine that the handheld version made easier, Mos Espa Pod Race! Though, in this case, I think the lesson challenge is a bad thing. In the console version, the level just keeps repeating the 3rd lap until you cross the finish line while in first place. But in this version, you just need to complete 3 laps, and if you don't get first place, it says level failed and doesn't play the ending cutscene, but you still get to keep all the collectibles you found and can continue to the next level if you exit to the cantina. Considering they bothered to change continue story to replay, you'd think they'd have fixed this. Maybe it's a glitch, maybe it's an anti-frustration feature, but either way, it gives no motivation to do well. Speaking of which, the vehicle levels were all prone to changes. Unlike in the console version, where they're in more of a Star Fox-like third-person perspective, all the vehicle levels here are from a top-down perspective, kind of like Galaga. The DS version also had 2 or 3 of the mini-kits in each ship level be rewards for going through an area without losing all your hearts. In fact, the most drastically changed level is one of the vehicle levels, Speeder Showdown. In the console version, Speeder Showdown is a vehicle-level, character-level hybrid, with segments where you play as Luke and Leia on foot, segments where you play as Luke and Leia on their speeder bikes, and a final segment where you get into an AT-AT. But in the DS version, it's just the speeder bike chase. However, while Speeder Showdown was the most drastically changed, the change that makes me the most upset was how they changed the final level of Revenge of the Sith, Darth Vader. In isolation, it's fine, especially in story mode. It retains a lot of the elements that made Schaeferless Productions call it the best level in the game. High but fair difficulty, frantic pace, Anakin and Obi-Wan being forced to work together because they can't find a place to fight, having Anakin go from a playable character to a boss at the end of the level, etc. But 2 of the most iconic things about it were removed for the DS version. 1, they changed the background music. The console version used Anakin vs. Obi-Wan, a driving track that plays during the scene in the original film and is based around the iconic Battle of the Heroes leitmotif. However, The handheld version used hyperspace, a theme from Empire Strikes Back that is used in 4 other levels in this game. And 2, in free play, you don't get to fight the second player/CPU companion like in the console version, which is one of the best and most unique things about the level. I know it was probably a space issue or a technology issue, but it's still disappointing.
Though perhaps I'm being too harsh on this game. Most of the cuts and changes they made were likely based more around what they were technologically able to do instead of what they wanted to include. And they did add a few things to the DS version to make it stand out from the console versions. But are they worth it? Back in the 90s, when technology was more limited and video games weren't really taken seriously as a medium, gaming companies could get away with an extremely stripped-down version of a video game whose only unique feature is being portable. But in the late 2000s, when video game reviews were becoming commonplace and technology was better than ever before, yeah, Traveler's Tales needed to add at least one thing to set it apart from the console version.
First of all, to make up for the massacre of characters and extras, they added 1 exclusive character and 1 exclusive extra. Well, sort of. They added the Scout Trooper, who had previously only been an extra toggle character, and came up with a new extra called Big Blasters, which just made the blasters bigger. Wow, they must have really strained their brain to think of that one. They also added some little puzzles that you had to do to activate the activation panels. The Protocol Droid panels have a game with falling bricks where you have to find the type of brick highlighted on the top screen. Astromech Droid panels have you solve a combination lock puzzle where you have to drag highlighted bricks towards a little arrow. Bounty Hunter panels have you locate and tap all instances of a certain highlighted brick. And Imperial panels have you play a Match 2 memory game. However, the biggest thing that the DS version added was a collection of Star Wars-themed minigames. I guess they saw how Super Mario 64 DS added a bunch of minigames and were like, let's do that, but worse! Because this is a DS game, all of them are solely controlled using the touchscreen to show off that the DS had one. Once you have either completed all the levels or lost all of your hearts, you get a rank, which are based on the levels in the Jedi Order. If you get the highest rank, the chosen one, on a minigame, you'll get a gold brick. So if you want to 100% the game, you need to get good at these minigames. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, most of them aren't very good. But let's go through them all. Deflection Challenge, based on the scene from A New Hope where Luke is practicing deflecting blaster bolts using a Jedi training remote. You use your stylus to move the lightsaber and block shots from the training remote. If you fail to deflect a shot, you lose a heart. Lose all 4 hearts and you lose the game. However, in order for it to register a deflection, you need to be near pixel perfect. There are many times where I've got it in what I was sure was the right position and yet I still lost a heart. Because of this, I always got Youngling rank when I was growing up, and even now, with my better hand-eye coordination, the highest rank I've gotten is Jedi Knight. Pit Stop, based on the pod race from The Phantom Menace. This is 6 minigames in a trench coat. You have to complete little tasks related to fixing a pod racer while being timed. The goal is to complete them all as fast as you can. These segments range from replacing machine parts to cleaning the windscreen, but the easiest one is remove debris, which can be completed in less than 3 seconds, and the hardest one is refuel, which has extremely finicky controls that you're constantly having to wrestle with. I'm decent at this game and was decent at it growing up, but the time limit really stresses me out. Camino Challenge, based on the scene from Attack of the Clones where Obi-Wan looks for the planet Camino. It's a fairly standard Simon-like game. You have 5 Star Wars planets on the screen: Hoth, Coruscant, Mustafar, Tatooine, and Kashyyyk, and each one plays a little sound effect related to that planet when touched. A sequence of sound effects is played, and you have to repeat that sequence by touching the planets with your stylus. This is the only game that I can say without a shadow of a doubt that I am good at. I always get Chosen One rank, which is saying something because I have never gotten Chosen One rank on most of these minigames. Evasion Challenge, based on the scene from Attack of the Clones where Obi-Wan follows Jango Fett through Geonosis' ring system. You move the Jedi Starfighter with your stylus, avoiding asteroids while collecting blue coin orbs and orange bomb orbs. The bomb orbs clear out the screen a little by destroying asteroids. I'd call it a shmup, but you don't actually shoot anything, you just dodge. I'm okay at this game, but nowhere near amazing. Grievous, based on the scene from Revenge of the Sith where General Grievous rides his wheel-shaped vehicle. You use the stylus to make his vehicle move and jump, avoiding obstacles and collecting coins in a tunnel. It's a lot like Temple Run, if you remember that game. This is a game that I somehow managed to get Chosen One rank on, even if I'm not good at it now. I must have either been really locked in or really lucky at that particular moment. Focus Survival, based on the scene from The Empire Strikes Back where Luke learns to use the Force on Dagobah. You have to drag these Force orbs into the center of the screen with your stylus as they continuously drift away. This game is infuriating. The Force orbs just won't sit still and you have to keep dragging them back into the center, like Sisyphus constantly having to roll that boulder up that hill. I have never played this game and not gotten really tense. Levitation Challenge, based on the scene from Return of the Jedi where Luke uses the Force to make C-3PO hover. You have to drag C-3PO down a path, collecting little Yodas to refill your, Force fuel, and reach the end of the path without running out of fuel. Along the way, you have to avoid hitting the walls or the stormtroopers along the path, which will subtract from your fuel gauge. The touchscreen controls in this game are very slippery and make it much harder than it needs to be. Activation, which is literally just a gamified version of the activation panel puzzles. While I'm very good at this game and managed to get Chosen One rank on it, I find it to be very lazy. Like, come on, you could have come up with something else. And speaking of laziness, the other 4 minigames, Deflection Survival, Evasion Survival, Camino Survival, and Levitation Survival, are just endless versions of previous minigames with increased difficulty. As if they weren't already hard enough. So all in all, these minigames are terrible with poor controls and cheap difficulty, and are the only thing that has kept me from 100% completion of this game.
However, while this game is a clearly inferior port, that's only in comparison to the console games. In regards to handheld versions of LEGO Star Wars games, this was far from the worst one. In fact, it's not even the worst one on the Nintendo DS. LEGO Star Wars had terrible luck when it came to handheld ports. In fact, compared to the previous attempts at porting LEGO Star Wars to handhelds, the complete Saga on the DS was actually a huge improvement. The previous 2 LEGO Star Wars games, LEGO Star Wars the video game and LEGO Star Wars 2 the original trilogy, both got completely butchered when they were ported to handhelds.
First of all, both of these games had extremely sad ports on the Game Boy Advance. At this point, the DS was already released and available for them to develop games for, but perhaps they weren't quite used to making games for this brand new system, so they stuck to the GBA because it was older and therefore more familiar. Even if it forced them, or rather, the studio they outsourced the development of the games to strip the games down to their absolute barest essentials. These games are sprite-based and from an isometric POV, and have still images and emoticon speech bubbles instead of proper cutscenes. LEGO Star Wars the video game for the GBA has no hub world. You just pick which episode you want to play. It also has only 1 sprite per character, creating the jarring image of Episode 1 Obi-Wan fighting Episode 2 Anakin on Mustafar. Instead of character classes, each character has a special ability. There are no vehicle levels and no Camino level either. Instead, they have a level where Anakin goes to Tatooine to save his mother, which means now you, the player, can slaughter not just the men, but the women and the children too. You can find Death Star holograms instead of mini-kits, and collect studs, though you never get enough studs to unlock new characters just by playing through story mode, so you'll have to grind for them in free play an awful lot. Oh yeah, and the controls are terrible, especially when it comes to the fighting. All in all, this is an extremely bare-bones adaptation and a crime against the original game. The GBA version of LEGO Star Wars 2 is much better. It has a hub world, vehicle levels, different character sprites, mini-kits, and even activation panels. So already we can see that they're making up for the mistakes they made. However, it still has a very slow frame rate and isn't as good as the console version. And also, it is a GBA game that came out when the DS was very much dominating the handheld gaming market. Now, fortunately, they also made a DS version of LEGO Star Wars 2: The Original Trilogy to capitalize on the rapid success of what would later go down in history as the third best-selling game system of all time. I never owned this game, but my childhood best friend had a copy that she either borrowed or stole from her brother, probably the latter, she loved mischief, and I played it for a little while when I was sleeping over at her house once. But apparently, I didn't play it for long enough to realize that it was probably the worst LEGO Star Wars game ever. This game has more bugs than an anthill. The textures often don't load, leaving characters stuck in a dark, featureless void. Characters can get stuck under platforms and endlessly fall on loop. Sometimes the game won't register that you've completed the tasks needed to move on to the next area, so you just have to quit the level, go back to the cantina, and start over from the beginning. Sometimes the wrong soundtrack plays in cutscenes, creating a lot of dissonance. And in the Return of the Jedi segment, it's possible to glitch right from the first level to the last level. And even if you put aside all the glitches, this game isn't very well made. The camera is awful and rarely follows the characters like it's supposed to. The frame rate plummets every time there are more than 3 characters on screen. The physics are extremely janky, and oftentimes when characters try to push objects, it doesn't register and they just end up plummeting off cliffs or whatever. And at times, the devs didn't do a good enough job at explaining what the player is supposed to do, leading to many gamers getting lost. The Battle of Endor level is a perfect showcase of how shoddy this game is. Not only does it have a glitch where you can play as a ship in a character level in free play, but it's also got an awful camera, a slow frame rate, tedious platforming, and even more glitches than the one I just mentioned. In fact, most of the craziest glitches in this game are in the Return of the Jedi segments. A shame, because that's my favorite movie. The cutscenes in this game are nothing like actual LEGO Star Wars cutscenes. They're just characters walking up to each other in-game and doing little animations. As bad as they are, they have a very funny, so bad it's good quality. There's also a bonus level called Sandbox, which is just a desert with a bunch of random stuff in it. You play as Princess Leia in her gold bikini and just go crazy. You can't beat it, it's just a sandbox for you to mess around in, hence the name. It's kinda cool, but it's certainly no Lego City. Now, LEGO Star Wars 2: The Original Trilogy was released to coincide with the 2006 re-releases of the original trilogy, with both the original and special edition versions bundled together. That, combined with the fact that they were developing versions for many handheld systems and home consoles at the same time, gives me the feeling that the DS version was rushed. That would explain why it ended up so glitchy, shoddy, and unpolished, which is common for rushed games. As Shigeru Miyamoto once said, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. And while that isn't always true, it certainly would explain why this game turned out the way it did. Compared to these games, LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga for the DS is a huge improvement. The graphics are better than the original trilogies, the glitches are few and far between, and the physics aren't nearly as janky. So maybe this game isn't all that bad. I just lacked the perspective to see that it was a significant step up from its predecessors. And in spite of all that I've said in this video, I'm glad I owned this game growing up. Despite its flaws, it's still very much LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga. It's still a big game with a lot to do and see, and it's still translated the 6 Star Wars films quite well. And I am incredibly fortunate that my parents were financially able to get the console version as well. Getting to play the console version after only experiencing the handheld version was like hearing a remix of a song you already knew by heart. Familiar, but yet enhanced and new in so many ways. Anyways, if you liked the video, or are just impressed by how much I look like Carrie Fisher, be sure to like and subscribe. And make sure to support my Patreon if you can!
Until next time, stay stylish, and may the Force be with you.
A long, long time ago, in a galaxy far away, Naboo was under an attack. And Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn went to talk the Federation into maybe cutting them a little slack. But their response, it didn't thrill 'em. They locked the doors and tried to kill 'em. They escaped from that gas and met Jar Jar and Boss Nass. They took a bongo from the scene and they went to Theed to see the Queen. They all wound up on Tatooine. That's where they found this boy. Oh my, this here Anakin guy. Maybe Vader someday later, now he's just a small fry. And he left his home and kissed his mommy goodbye, saying soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. Soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. Did you know that Junkyard Slave wasn't even old enough to shave? But he could use the Force, they say. And did you know he started hitting on the Queen when he was 9 and she 14? Yeah, turns out he would marry her someday. Well, they knew he built C-3PO when they'd heard how fast his pod can go, and they were broke, it's true. So they made a Witcher or two. He was a prepubescent and flying ace, and the minute Jabba started off that race, well, they knew who would win first place. Oh yes, it was that boy. They started singing, my, this here Anakin guy. Maybe Vader someday later, now he's just a small fry. He left his home and kissed his mommy goodbye, saying soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. Soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. Now they finally got to Coruscant, the Jedi Council they knew would want to see how good the boy could be. So they took him there and they told the tale how his midichlorians were off the scale, and he might fulfill that prophecy. Oh, the council was impressed, of course. Could he bring balance to the Force? They interviewed the kid. Oh, training they forbid, 'cause Yoda sensed in him much fear. And Qui-Gon said, now listen here, just stick it in your pointy ear. I still will teach this boy. He was singing, my, this here Anakin guy. Maybe Vader someday later, now he's just a small fry. He left his home and kissed his mommy goodbye, saying soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. Soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. They caught a ride back to Naboo, 'cause Queen Amidala wanted to, but frankly would have liked to stay. They all fought in that epic war, and it wasn't long at all before little Hotshot flew his plane and saved the day. And in the end, some Gungans died, some ships blew up and some pilots fried. A lot of folks were croaking, the battle droids were broken, and the man Obi-Wan admired most met up with Darth Maul, and now he's toast. And since Qui-Gon was now a ghost, Kenobi trained that boy. And he was singing, my, this here Anakin guy. Maybe Vader someday later, now he's just a small fry. And he left his home and kissed his mommy goodbye, saying soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. Soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. And they were singing, my, this here Anakin guy. Maybe Vader someday later, now he's just a small fry. And he left his home and kissed his mommy goodbye, saying soon I'm gonna be a Jedi.